Thank you, Rabbi Clownbound. Thank you for everything you've done for our communities, and probably now one of the greatest honors of my life, being introduced by you. So I might need a moment. Thank you, Rabbi Werber, as well. This is such a beautiful night. I'm just glad I didn't have to sing with this microphone. Hello and Shabbat Shalom. My name is Kelsey Louie, and I'm the proud CEO of The Door, a premier youth development organization. I'm also a proud gay man and a proud former CEO of Gay Men's Health Crisis, the world's first HIV/AIDS service organization. I want to start by thanking Jay Fisher for inviting me to speak today about HIV and AIDS. It's so great to see you, Michael and Jay. I also want to acknowledge Michael Harwood, a former board chair of GMHC. Without him, none of my success would have been possible, so thank you. In my years working in the HIV and AIDS field, I learned one thing time and again. We cannot do this work alone. All of our progress over the 41 years of the AIDS epidemic has been the result of the strength and momentum we gain from working together, which is why speaking here tonight is so special to me. I would like to recognize how many people in this community have provided care for people living with HIV and AIDS, whether it's through a job, a volunteer role, or activism, by caring for someone you love, or by raising money at AIDS Walk. It's so special that commemorating World AIDS Day is part of the ritual calendar. Every person's engagement has ripple effects that make a huge difference. To find the embodiment of that kind of individual commitment and its impact, one doesn't need to look any further than Jay's mother, Rita, who with many of you is the highest AIDS Walk fundraiser in GMHC's history, having raised more than $1 million. Thank you, Rita, for all that you've done. I know that you're listening tonight. When COVID first came about, many people started to compare this new pandemic with the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Yes, there were a lot of similarities. Poor communities and communities of color were hit harder. Another more important similarity is that communities showed up for one another. I saw firsthand how the HIV/AIDS community came together to support one another during COVID. It recalled the darkest days of the epidemic when AIDS was considered a death sentence that mostly affected gay men, and the government wasted years doing nothing. One of the most touching responses to AIDS within the community came from kind, powerful women of varied backgrounds who stepped up to help, care for, and advocate for those at risk, for the newly diagnosed, the sick, and the dying when no one else would. Similarly, when COVID hit, it didn't matter that coronavirus wasn't in an AIDS service organization's mission statement. Organizations like GMHC understand that deadly, infectious viruses with no cure and the public health crises they cause affect us all. We know that pandemics, epidemics, and other public health emergencies thrive on silence, information silos, discrimination, poverty, and other socioeconomic inequities. AIDS organizations knew the critical importance of raising awareness and disseminating factual information about how COVID is and is not transmitted, as well as combating misinformation, stigma, and barriers to care. And when COVID vaccines became available, the discourse that took place to ensure broad access and to prioritize populations at greatest risk was inspiring. As we shift to a more hybrid phase of the COVID pandemic, we're seeing that whether it's COVID, MPV, HIV, the same drivers that turn infectious disease outbreaks into public health emergencies are at play, and the work involved in battling those drivers remain the same. On the upside, when we work together, when we create health policies driven by science and data, share critical resources equitably, break down stigma, and dismantle barriers to care, especially those caused by racism, homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny, we make amazing progress. We've seen that kind of progress with COVID and MPV, and we still see it with what's happening with HIV and AIDS today. Here are some highlights from the newest HIV surveillance data released by the New York City Department of Health for World AIDS Day yesterday. From 2019 to 2021, the estimated number of new HIV infections in New York City decreased by 8%. Likewise, new HIV diagnoses in New York City is down in 2021 is down 23% since 2017 and down 73% since 2001. And even some of the not great data news this week was a temporary anomaly that was expected. In 2021, for the first time in years, New York City saw an atypical increase in the annual number of new HIV diagnoses of 14%. However, that surge was anticipated as a COVID rebound. During the first waves of COVID in 2020, HIV testing and prevention services were less available and accessible. New HIV diagnoses dropped at a steeper rate as a result. However, in 2021, many sites reopened and resumed HIV services. Simply put, it's likely that the people who delayed testing during the early COVID waves tested in 2021 instead, hence the spike. The real downside in HIV right now is the data that's not an anomaly. This is the stuff we've known for a very long time. HIV continues to disproportionately affect Black and brown people, women of color, and LGBTQ people, especially LGBTQ people of color. Some salient 2021 data that reflects ongoing health disparities. 60% of all men newly diagnosed with HIV were men who have sex with men. 80% of all men newly diagnosed were Black or Latinx. 88% of all women newly diagnosed with HIV were Black or Latinx. So, we still have a lot more work to do. If anything, the heightened stigma around COVID and MPV have shown how the work that we've been doing for the last 41 years to fight HIV and AIDS is still relevant today. Infectious disease thrives where it always has, in the shadows, under veils of shame and fear. We still have work to do on the biomedical side as well, to find better, cheaper treatments, as well as a cure and a vaccine. But our biggest remaining battles in HIV and AIDS are combating stigma, ignorance, and health disparities. 20 years ago, HIV prevention in pill forms, PrEP and PEP, didn't exist. That innovation has been a game changer, and ending the epidemic depends on getting more people on PrEP. But we can't harness the power of PrEP or any other biomedical innovation when stigma, ignorance, or both stop people from getting tested, seeking treatment, and getting the help that they need. Case in point, high cost, complex insurance coverage, and HIV medication hesitancy remain common barriers for PrEP. So PrEP usage is far lower than it needs to be, especially in the communities that need it the most. PrEP isn't getting to those at greatest risk fast enough. All that needs to change. My time at the door has underscored that need. Of the 11,000 young people the door sees each year, about 20% identify as LGBTQ. With 1,600 new HIV infections each year in New York City, I believe that the door is uniquely positioned to help end the epidemic. We are able to educate young people about HIV testing, PrEP and PEP, and sexual health, young people who may not consider themselves to be at risk. A study done by Kaiser Permanente revealed that in 2019, more than 50% of people underestimated their risk level for HIV infection. If people don't believe they're at risk, then they won't take the necessary precautions. As always, the solutions are rooted in expanding access to every prevention and treatment tool we've got, and building awareness and educating people about HIV across all demographics, young people especially. We have to find a way to get our messages to the people who need it the most in the most accessible way possible. So my biggest message to you tonight is that what we talk about matters. because what we talk about becomes what we pay attention to and what we act on. The stories we share matter at every level, whether that's at the dinner table, among our friends and family, in our houses of worship, in our workplaces, and the powerful halls of government, and in the media. The truth is, it wasn't only about gay men in the 1980s, and it still isn't. But people will only know that if we talk about it, disseminate good information, and share the powerful stories of the people who are affected by HIV and AIDS. After all, silence equals death. This is our work. Our work is to transform science into policy, headlines into real resources, hope into commitment, and talk into action. Thank you for doing your part in that. Together, we will keep up the good fight, and we will end AIDS once and for all. Thank you.